All right, folks, welcome. This is going to be a bit different. This one is not about the news. I will warn you now, spoilers are definitely ahead. I'm going to look at a bit of, uh, well, how to say it? I'm going to look at more than just what happened in the movie. I will be reviewing the movie and certain scenes and how I think everything went, which I loved the movie. A friend of mine from work actually ended up with an extra ticket, which meant I got to go, and I just had to buy him lunch that day, which I love. But there was a lot of questions after Infinity War. And if you haven't seen that one, I will spoil it as well. I'm basically going to spoil the entirety of the MCU if you haven't seen any of it. So definitely stop now if you've not seen uh, the most recent two movies, Infinity War and Endgame, but also the rest of the MCU, because it all is tied together. The Russos, Feige, uh, Favreau, all of them did a wonderful job of tying everything together to where there's really not any continuity issues between them. Even little things like Thor: Dark World, or just Thor: Dark World is one of the better examples, or Thor: Ragnarok, where it really just is a Thor movie. It's not addressing anything that any of the other Avengers would need to be there for. It is just Thor. Same with the two Guardians movies, where it really only focuses on what they need. And we're going back a decade here, really longer than that, all the way back to Iron Man. There are plenty of resources out there that will tell you which order to watch them in for different things. You can watch them in the order that came out. Iron Man, I believe it was Iron Man 2. No, actually, I believe it was Iron Man 2, First Avenger, and then after that, I lose it. I prefer them in the chronological order where you start with First Avenger, then you get Captain Marvel, then you get Hulk, then finally Iron Man 2, Avengers, Iron Man 3, all of those things. But even if you watch them in the order they came out, you're going to have a lot of fun. It's just 22 movies, about 2 days worth of movies. We're pushing for almost 48 hours. So let's get into this. A quick recap of Infinity War. Infinity War basically is um, Thor and Hulk are nowhere to be found because prior to this they have been stuck on Sakaar, which is, if you really look into it, it's not part of the universe. It's outside. When Thor gets there, Loki's been there for weeks. The Grand Master says he would be millions of years old. Uh, so time is relative there. The only way in or out is basically through an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole. And while they're there, of course, Hela is consolidating her power. Uh, Backing up a little bit, we open the movie with Thor is stuck in hell. He's facing Surtur, basically the demon that's going to end Asgard in Ragnarok. Ends up getting away, takes Surtur's crown with him, gets back to Asgard, finds Loki impersonating Odin, watching a play, basically lionizing Loki. He gets there, forces Loki to reveal himself. They go to Earth, find out that the rest home he trapped Odin in is being demolished. They go to Doctor Strange. Well, they're brought to Doctor Strange. He helps them find Thor, or not Thor, Odin, in Norway. Norway is actually going to be pretty important here in a minute. When Odin finally gives up the ghost and dies, very similar to Yoda, how he just allowed himself to die in Empire. And when that happens, of course, Hela is freed. She destroys Mjolnir. Loki calls for the Bifrost. They're all there. She ends up knocking both of them out. They end up on Sakaar, where Loki is, of course, one of the ruling class, and Thor is made to be a gladiator where he fights the Hulk. They ultimately, you would get Ruffalo back as Banner. They escape, go to Asgard, and then ultimately you have Fenrir brought in, the gigantic wolf, versus Hulk. Hela's forces all ends up with Loki putting Surtur's crown on the Eternal Flame, which allows Surtur to come back, and he destroys Hela and Asgard. That's a very simplistic way of telling that movie. Trust me, you want to watch it. A lot of great scenes, a lot of humor, and just some great scenes from Waititi. But that is exactly where we pick up. Thor, Loki, Valkyrie, and Banner, and as Hulk have gotten a ship that actually Korg and Meek brought from Sakaar to get the remaining Asgardians off of Asgard, since it's about to be destroyed. As they're trying to find a place to go, Thanos shows up. Originally, it's looking like he's going to pull his "you're privileged to die at the hands," blah blah blah, but really he's there because he wants the Space Stone, which he thought was on Asgard. Ultimately, Loki gives it to him. We get a great line from Loki. We have a Hulk. Hulk shows up, gets a few good punches in. Thanos, who is, I'm not sure if he's part Eternal or part Celestial, but we know he's not just pure Titan, not just pure mortal. He ends up winning the battle, beating Hulk. Heimdall sends Hulk to Earth, where he lands at the Sanctum Sanctorum. Ultimately, then Doctor Strange goes and gets Tony. Bruce says, "Hi, I'm back." They get the whole Infinity Stone explanation that the Collector gave us in Guardians. Then we get the Black Order showing up. We get Tony's wit and sass and calling him Squidward. We get the fight. Spider-Man's there eventually after seeing it from a bus and helping Tony. And we get our first look at right in the opening of Iron Spider, which is great. But ultimately, they're trying to kidnap Doctor Strange since he has the Time Stone. This is at the same time that the other members of the other two of the Black Order, because this one is just basically the magician of the wizard of the group and the brute. The other two are, I believe it is Scotland, might actually be England proper, where Vision and Scarlet Witch are. They're trying to get the Mind Stone from Vision. Cap, Tasha, and Sam show up. Ultimately, they injure one of them to where they flee. They get Vision back to headquarters. And from there, of course, they run into Rhodey, who's on holophone with Secretary of State Ross, who says, "Arrest them," on it, cuts them off, and now he's siding with Team Cap. They end up going to Wakanda, where Shuri is trying to separate the Mind Stone from Vision without killing him. Then from after, of course, we don't see that right away. Tony and Peter are on the Black Order's ship, where the wizard guy is torturing Doctor Strange to get the Time Stone. Strange is not letting them. Peter makes another one of his pop culture references, talking about that really old movie, Aliens. I have to admit, in Civil War, I didn't like the reference of that really old movie, Star Wars. I'm not that old, but Peter is a young punk. So they blow a hole in the side of the ship. It sucks the Black Order wizard out. They save Strange. Strange wants to turn the ship around and go back to Earth. Tony does not. So ultimately, they agree to go to Titan. Strange says if it comes down to Tony and Peter or the stone, he'll save the stone. And they get to Titan. Once they show up on Titan, though, because right after the opening scene is where the Guardians pick up Thor. I didn't talk about it at first because it's really not integral to the plot until right about now. They pick him up. We get Pirate Angel and all that. Basically, Drax is talking about how beautiful he is. Quill tries to lower his voice and all that. And then at this point, when the Guardians are headed to Titan, Thor, Groot, and Rocket are headed to Nidavellir. Mjolnir is gone. They need to go to Nidavellir to meet Eitri the Dwarf to forge a new weapon. We'll get to that in a minute. The Guardians, the rest of the Guardians, Drax, Gamora, Mantis, Quill, Drax, Gamora, Mantis, and Quill, show up on Titan. They attack Tony, Peter, and Strange. Ultimately, it comes down to a standstill where they realize they're not enemies. Tony, of course, tries to take charge. Quill tries to take charge. Ultimately, they do suss out a plan. We're just not told what it is because we just get the Quill and Tony interaction and so on. Now, while all that's going on is the Nidavellir scene, where Eitri initially attacks and then ultimately realizes it is Thor, says you were supposed to protect us, Asgard was supposed to protect us. Uh, Thor tells him Asgard is gone, restarts the forge, stands there holding the thing open. That scene we saw of what we thought was on the donut ship is actually Nidavellir. He's holding the iris open so the star can heat the forge to make the new weapon, which we learn is Stormbreaker. Once they have the mold open and the two pieces are cooling in the air, we hear that he's searching for the handle. Groot uses his arm to make the handle, chops it off. Thor summons it, and he's healed from the star damage. They Bifrost out to Wakanda. We'll get that in a minute. Well, all this, now, right up until that point, we go back to Titan. The entire battle is just a melee. It is Strange using magic. It's Tony using his tech. It's Drax trying to use his strength. It's Mantis. It's Gamora. Quill, all using their own style. It's just a melee. Ultimately, they do drop Mantis onto Thanos' shoulders. She tries to put him to sleep, and she almost does, but not really. They almost get the glove. Actually, Gamora, was not there. Part of the movie I skipped over because I forgot about it is Thanos takes Gamora to Vormir, throws her off a cliff, she dies, he gets the Soul Stone. So when Quill flips out because of this, Thanos gets to keep his gauntlet because they almost had it off, but they didn't. You get Peter jumping around and rolling around in the Iron Spider, saving people who'd been knocked far away. And ultimately, Thanos is about to kill Tony, but Strange stops him and says, I'll give you the stone if you spare his life. That happens. He warps out of there, whatever, to Wakanda. Now, the opening of the battle in Wakanda, you get, I don't really know their names. I didn't read a lot of the Thanos arcs when I was a kid. I was mostly just Iron Man or just Cap or just Punisher. But it's the lady from Black Order, the Brute, and the Brute, because her husband has died, and of course Squidward, the wizard, has died. So there's some banter at the Wakandan shield. Tasha, Cap, and Rhodey come back. Actually, it's Tasha, Cap, and T'Challa come back to the line. More banter, and then the Horde. I forget their actual name, but it's basically the dogs. They start just attacking the shield, and they're killing themselves doing it, but some of them do make it through. Ultimately, T'Challa opens a small section of the shield to funnel them so they don't get surrounded. So Shuri is up working on Vision while this is going on. Everybody, and I'm talking T'Challa's there, the Dora Milaje are there, M'Baku and his tribe is there, the border tribes are there. You've got Cap, Tasha, Falcon, Rhodey, and Banner, who is not Hulk. He cannot Hulk out at this point, is in the Hulkbuster armor. So the fight is going and going. Ultimately, right near the end, right before the climax, is when Thor shows up, decimates their forces. Now, I will tell you, if you've watched any, if you've seen my comments, I don't like using the word decimation for the snap. I like actually Eric Voss's Snaptermath, because a decimation is removing 1 in 10. Literally comes from the Roman military tactic of having the centuries, meaning the legions of 100 men. They would split into groups of 10. Each draw, the Blackstone would get beaten to death. It was a brutal thing to restore order. A halving or a culling would be removing half. Okay, my professor moment's over. He shows up, basically decimates the monsters. Wanda shows up on the field, even though she had been up in the tower with Shuri and Vision, and kills Black Order chick. There's a little bit of banter there. Vision ultimately ends up going up against the Black Order that went there, and then Thanos shows up. Big fight. He's using the stones. Cap has that great moment from the trailer where he stops Thanos trying to slap him down, and he's holding his arm, and Thanos is. You get that moment of he's strong, and then we're done. He gets the stone. Vision. Wanda actually destroys the stone. He uses Time Stone to reverse. He gets the stone. Thor throws Stormbreaker, hits him right in the chest. And I'm talking, if he was a human, he missed his heart with the edge of the blade by an inch. And Thanos says, "You should have gone for the head." Snaps, vanishes. Half of everyone dies. We're left with Tony, Cap, Thor, Tasha, Clint, and Banner. Uh, not Hawkeye. Fury, uh, Hill, T'Challa, Peter, Parker, Peter Quill, Drax. They're all gone. And I mean, yeah, when you look at it, they took more than half of the superheroes, but it was half of all life. But there is the one thing at the end of the movie you see: helicopter pilots were snapped. Anybody else in the helicopter or in the building it hits or under it also dies. Planes, boats, cars. That's why it's really more than a halving; it's a culling. But it ends with that, and that's really all there is. The end scene is Thanos first shows up in the Soul Gem world, talks to young Gamora. "Did you do it?" "Yes." "What did it cost?" "Everything." Then you see him on his farm, and we're done. Now, again, that was Infinity War. That was a lot of spoilers. It was also really fast, 2-hour movie in about 10 minutes. Moving to Endgame, and I will tell you for those of you who haven't seen Captain Marvel or Endgame, but you saw Infinity War, here's where you stop. This is where I will spoil crap for you. But before you go, you do not need to see Captain Marvel first. So if you're like me and it's like I can only see one movie this check and I can see another, if you want to see Endgame first, you can. Her entire movie is her story. It's the same as we got with Thor. It's the same we got with Guardians, with Cap First Avenger, with Iron Man 1, with Hulk, the Ed Norton one. It is just her story. Um, so you're not gonna miss anything if you haven't seen Captain Marvel. I actually still haven't seen it because I was never a Captain Marvel fan. I'm waiting for Redbox, but I know her backstory. Moving forward, Captain Marvel 2 will probably play more of a part. But moving into Endgame, of course, we open up with Tony and Gamora stranded on the Benatar in space. Tony makes the recording we see in the previews where he's telling Pepper, "It's you, it's always you," all this other stuff. We get some moments where we see Tony and Tony and Nebula, trying to repair the ship. You see him welding something, she's doing something. He's in that classic tank top doing it. Ultimately, he tells Pepper it's been 21 days, or 22 days, one day for every movie. I love how everybody points that out because it is neat. He tells her the air's going to run out tomorrow, and he's going to go to sleep now. He just stretches out on the floor, but Nebula moves him to basically the captain's seat. And then what we get is what looks like a sunrise, like the ship is turning to come into view of a sun, of a star. But it's Captain Marvel showing up. She tows the ship back to Earth. And then we realize all that time, I mean, there should have been no gravity on the ship going to Titan, but Titan's gravity was off, so it was lighter gravity. And being stuck in outer space, lighter gravity, there should have been no gravity on that ship. But this is, of course, comic book movie physics. But even just extremely light gravity does affect your body. Plus, 3 weeks with almost no food, no water. So there's even a scene where we see Tony offer rations over to Nebula, and she says no, and he ends up eating a bit more. So he's emaciated. And like Eric Voss over at New Rockstar said, I really hope that was the same thing they did to Evans in First Avenger and just digitally emaciated him. I really hope he didn't pull a Christian Bale and lose half his weight and then pack it back on. But they show up, and here's where everything really starts. Prior to this, we saw Tasha holding a conference with Rocket, Rhodey, Okoye, and Captain Marvel. and it using the same hollow things as they did in the World Security Council. Then they get some more information, and Rhodey tells her about Clint. He has become Ronin. The opening scene, and I skip over it because it's Clint's story, so it goes here to tell why he's become Ronin. The opening scene is him with his daughter. Joe Russo's daughter plays Hawkeye's daughter. She's learning archery. She hits a bullseye. He goes to do something. The snap happens, and we hear the same thunder, and all three of his kids and his wife are gone. So he's lost everybody. So just as I would be broken. It's just that Clint goes for the Ronin character, where he's killing drug lords and so on. Ultimately, he's after a Yakuza boss, who's the same guy that played Shinjin in The Wolverine. And the character is actually one of the leaders of The Hand, which was from the Daredevil series. It's just not the same actor. Then Tasha comes in. She convinces him to come back with her to Avengers HQ. Tony shows up, being brought by Captain Marvel. They end up getting him getting him into a wheelchair and all, and he's back to the Tony from before the cave. He cares about him. Now, in that, he cares about him and Pepper, since they have become a couple. But he's not going to go on the fool's errand to fight a big bad guy. They've already they've already at this point they're trying to convince him, and he says no. While they're talking about going to find Thanos to make him undo the snap, Tony is adamant that he is out. He's not doing any of it. He ends up standing up, ripping the IVs out of his arms, trying to get his point across, collapses, ends up in the hospital. So this is where we get Rocket, Gamora, and this is after the 5 years deal. Or no, this is before the 5 year jump. Rocket, Gamora, Cap, Tasha, and Thor are there. I believe Clint was there, but I can't remember. It was a pretty big scene. He chops off Thanos' arm. Then he goes for the head. Then they realize Thanos wasn't lying in that scene when he said he used the stones, which is how they tracked him, to destroy the stones so that you couldn't undo his snap. And that's when Thor goes for the head, kills Thanos. They're back to square one. They start kind of losing hope at this point, which is when the big thing happens. We saw the preview. We saw Scott Lang. And Clint asks, is this live? It's the front gate, blah, blah, blah. Not Clint, Cap. What happened is he's stuck in the quantum zone, and after the snap, they've basically thrown all the vehicles and stuff that they can find and register to anyone that's gone in storage. A rat crawls across the control panel for the quantum tunnel, and Scott's back. It's been 5 years. He finds out that what's happened. He goes to the memorial, sees his name but no one else. No other Langs. Goes back to his wife's house. Cassie's there. She's now a teenager. He ends up getting all the way to Avengers HQ. Long drive in that van. And here's where we pick up. He tells them about the quantum realm. Tells them how he was told not to have or to mess with time vortexes, although it is vortices, not vortexes. And they come up with the idea for time travel. They go to Tony. They try to convince him to come help. He tells them to screw off. They realize they're not going to get his help, so they try without him. This is where we kind of meet Professor Hulk, because they realize they have another scientist, another brilliant mind. And we find out that we get Professor Hulk, but not the way I wanted. All the prediction videos that I watched, and this is New Rockstars, Everything Always, Super Carlin Brothers, all of them that I watched showed the, like, blink and you'll miss it, literally, picture of the subatomic city in the quantum realm. And in a lot of the comics, after the Ancient One dies, that's where she ends up going. And they go there, she merges the two minds, and we get Professor Hulk. Here, Bruce just basically exposed himself to a lot more gamma, Boom, we have Professor Hulk. And he's a weirdo goofball, but he's still Banner. So they try it, and Scott becomes a teenager, then an old man, then a baby, then Scott. We get some humor through all that. And as they're realizing this is a lot harder than they thought, Tony pulls up. And he has solved it. We had the moment at his lake house that he built for Pepper, and we ultimately find out their daughter, Morgan, who's now 4, almost 5, he had solved it on the inverted Mobius strip. They can time travel. They can travel through time instead of time through them. They build this and they start talking the mechanics. And here's where, because I've watched and read a lot of stuff about time travel. Okay, there are a lot of rules, but the big one is the paradox rule. You can't change anything that would change your trip to the past. It's the classic, if you change something that means you didn't go back, you couldn't have changed it, so you did go back, but then you changed it so you couldn't, and we get the unending loop of you go back, but you didn't, but you did, but you didn't, and everybody gets a headache. So they realize they have to avoid themselves. They can't change anything. All this stuff going on. So they split into teams. They have Cap, Scott, Banner, and Tony go into the Battle of New York. And they have Rocket and Thor going to Asgard during Thor Dark World. Tasha and Clint are going to Vormir. Nebula and Rhodey are going to, I forget the name of it, Mardok, the planet from the opening scene of Guardians 1. So starting with Nebula and Rhodey, ultimately they do get the stone. She is part cyborg. Her arms are not flesh. She just reaches through the thing, burning off the fake flesh, grabs it, and we have the Power Stone. Then we have Tasha and Clint. They get there. Natasha, daughter of Ivan. Clint, son of Edith. Red Skull does his whole spiel again. And they start arguing about who gets to sacrifice themselves. And Clint even says, I'm getting the impression we're thinking different people. Both of them are going to make the jump. She shoots him with her little shock thing. He shoots a bomb at the ground, knocking her off. Right as he's about to jump, she jumps with him, ends up stabbing the wall with one of his grappling arrows and latching it to him. And then she's holding onto his arm. She makes the choice. She dies. He wakes up in the water, and he's got the Soul Stone. So we have the Soul Stone in the same time frame as Guardians 1. Here's where that comes in and becomes very important. Nebula is on the same network in all timelines. They're actually able to take control of future Nebula, and past Nebula, who's still evil, takes off the new colored stuff and poses as her, goes back into what would be present day for us. We're going to stop there for a minute. We're going to go to the other team, Tony, Cap, Banner, and Scott. They get to the Battle of New York, and here's where we get our next problem. Of course, they have to wait for the battle to end. We open up on the scene where you have Cap is coming up slowly to the penthouse of Stark Tower. Stark and Scott are, in the room with the rest of the Avengers. That great end scene where Loki, I think I'll have that drink now, blah, blah, blah. And Banner is waiting, he's there trying to find a way in as well, but since he's Professor Hulk, he has to act like Hulk, which is a stupid comedy moment. It was funny. Ultimately, that scene ends. Tony flicks Ant-Man onto Iron Man, and all but the past Hulk go down in the elevator. Hulk takes the stairs. They get down. Here's the interesting part. Sitwell and the director, Robert Redford's character, show up with Grillo and the rest of Strike, so it's all Hydra. Cap's in the elevator with him. He tells him, I need that. We've already heard Sitwell say he's going to take the scepter to List, Dr. List, who we saw at the end of Age of Ultron, at the end of the one before Ultron, I forget my timeline, but where we got the first introduction of Wanda and Pietro. But here's where we're thinking it's going to be another elevator fight. Then Cap leans over and says, "Hail Hydra." Sitwell's eyes kind of change. He grabs it. And while all this is going on, in the lobby, we have future or present day Tony dressed as a worker as a shield worker, or basically a shield drone, with the goggles and the helmet and all of it. And he has Scott, since Tony's now out of his Iron Man, he's just back in his suit. Or no, he's not. He's still in his suit. Scott goes inside the arc reactor, pulls a little piece out that starts a cardiac arrest, which makes Tony drop the case with the Tesseract. Scott kicks it towards present day Tony, and they're about to make their escape as Thor is giving an electric shock to Iron Man to restart his heart, and all. Past Hulk bursts out of the stairwell, yelling about stairs. Tesseract goes flying. Loki grabs it, and Loki's gone. And we did in this whole thing see when Thor put the deal over Loki's mouth, because at the end of it, it was just there. So we did get a conclusion to that scene. But Loki's gone now with the Tesseract. So they go tell Scott, who has the deal. Now, the way they got the scepter, because President Cap gave it to President Scott to get out of there. Cap had a mirror match fight. The two Caps fighting. Ultimately, past Cap has President Cap in a headlock. He tells him Bucky is alive, shocks him for a bit, knocks him out, and heads down. There is one thing I'm not spoiling. You'll see it in this part of the movie, and it is a great bit. Ultimately, they go back and tell Banner and Scott to go back to the present, because they initially they only had enough Pym particles for one trip to the past and a return trip, with the exception of whoever had to jump off the cliff at Vormir. But Cap remembers Tony remembers when the Tesseract and Pym particles were very close together, and it is Fort Lehigh in 1970. So we get that scene from the trailer. Do you trust me? Yes. Banner and Scott go back to present day with the scepter and the Mind Stone. Tony and Cap go back, and then, of course, they have to get clothes to make them look like it. But Tony he steals the Tesseract, puts it in a briefcase, and ultimately ends up running into his father. And they talk, and you can tell it's very tight. This is where we bring in some of the philosophy and sociology. Tony, until Ultron with the BARF technology, biometric or biometrically augmented retroframing or whatever it was, until that, and really what we saw in Iron Man 3, or Iron Man 2, he hated his father. He had been basically raised by Edwin Jarvis. He saw his father as cold and aloof and all this other stuff. And then, slowly, from Iron Man 2 forward, he started to realize things about his dad. Here's where it all comes full circle. Tony basically is going through the same thing his dad is, because in 1970, Mrs. Stark was pregnant with Tony. Pepper he and Pepper have a 4-year-old. So he's basically giving his dad fatherhood advice, and he's realizing that Howard was not the bad father he thought. And ultimately, there is that resolution. Tony has come from self-centered to almost dying in the Middle East, which changes his personality to a little bit, but he's still kind of party boy. When he meets his father and he realizes that his father sees it as, I am sacrificing so that my child can have a better life, a really good life. That's that final grow up moment. Okay, it's the final moment where Tony sheds every last vestige of Tony is for Tony first. We get the closure there. Cap has gotten the Pym particles. Tony has the Tesseract. They meet up. That's where the Stan Lee cameo is. I'm not going to spoil that because they're never really integral to the plot. It's just Stan. And I do love that they gave that last one the way they did. When they come back, they have all but one stone. We have all but the Aether. And then, of course, this is Rocket and Thor. Bit of backstory on this. To convince Thor to get in on all this, they have to go to New Asgard, which is on Earth, in Tonsberg, Norway. For those of you like me who've read the comics and who've watched the movies a million times each, Tonsberg is where Red Skull found the Tesseract in Cap First Avenger. It is where Odin fought the Frost Giants in the opening scenes of Thor. It is where Odin died, and it is where New Asgard set up. It's not a floating castle over some part of Oklahoma, thank God. But we get there, and this is where the humor goes next level. Thor is, I believe Hemsworth is about 6'3", so he goes from what looks like a very rock solid 240 to about a 295, 305. Big beer gut, big, I mean, he looks like a redneck who literally just eats Hawaiian sweet bread and drinks beer. Ironically, that's what we see him doing several times in the movie. Korg and Meek are there. Korg is even wearing the Hawaiian shirt that Taika Waititi was wearing in one of his interviews. And at one point, we see that Korg is playing Fortnite. Noobmaster69 is insulting him. Thor gives some great insults over the headset. Ultimately, they convince him to go by Rocket saying there's beer on the ship. Now, this was Rocket and Thor. They get to Asgard during Dark World, in the time when Jane would have been on Asgard. And ironically, Portman did not have to shoot any new scenes. She did some voiceover work, but they used they showed unused footage from Thor: Dark World to put her in the movie. Rocket has a little thing that's going to pull the ether out of her. Thor ends up meeting up with his mother, and she basically solves the existential crisis he's in. He summons Mjolnir, is very happy he's still worthy. He and Rocket go back to the present, and we now have all 6 stones. We have all but 1 stone. Banner, at the beginning of Battle New York, his mission was the Time Stone at 177A Bleecker Street. I believe it's 177A, the Sanctum Sanctorum, where we see the Ancient One fighting the Chitauri on the roof of the Sanctum Sanctorum. She knocks Bruce out of the body into the astral plane, and we have this long, drawn-out conversation because he's told her he wants her to give him the Time Stone. She initially says no, until he reveals she's done this whole thing summoning an appearance of the timeline with the Infinity Stones circling it. If you pull one out, it creates a branch, an alternate universe, and it's this smoky black thing that shows it's a negative impact. He tells her that he will bring it right back to that exact moment to replace it, and she's still not happy about doing it until he tells her that Doctor Strange surrendered it to Thanos on Titan. And she gives it to him. She puts him back in the Professor Hulk body. He's back to the present. Now we have all 6. Tony builds a Stark Tech gauntlet. Ironically, it is a right-handed gauntlet, not left. So it is basically showing right versus left, good versus evil, Thanos versus Tony, with the old mantra of left being sinister. They get the stones in it, and Banner is the one, and you see, it could have been any of them. It could have been Rocket, because the glove actually starts expanding when Banner tries to put it on. They say that since it's emitting gamma radiation, that's what created the Hulk, and Banner basically has a healing power as powerful or more powerful than Wolverine, he's going to undo the snap. And he gets the moment where he's screaming he's not Thanos of Titan, so it's hurting him, and they tell him, all you're going to do is undo the snap, nothing else. He does, burns him badly, they get the glove off of him. As soon as it happens, Clint gets a call from his wife. So we have confirmation right then and there that it's good. But while that was happening, Evil Nebula from the past opens up some way for Thanos to bring his ship through the quantum realm, up out of the ceiling, and he attacks Avengers headquarters. This is where we get the scene from the preview of Clint in the little corridor with the dogs from Infinity War chasing him. Hulk and I believe it's Hulk and Scott and maybe Rocket are trapped in the bottom. Hulk's holding the stuff to keep them from dying. People are just scattered, and it's a battle. And ultimately, it's a game of keep away. But at one point, we hear when Cap has already fought him. We had the blade, which that sword that Thanos was using. It looks like a helicopter blade, so maybe that's the Russos giving a cheeky little nod to the Thanos copter. Who knows? But the shield is all but destroyed, and we get the scene from the preview again. Steve gritting his teeth, strapping the shield back down, and then you hear Steve, and you hear on your left, and all the sling ring portals start opening up, and we get the Ravagers, we get Wakanda, we get just any and every battle force that could be brought to be on the side of the Avengers. All the wizards are there. All of them are there to help this final battle. Peter ends up being the one, because he can jump around and flip around like a spider. He's trying to get the glove to the quantum van so they can get rid of the stones. And we get all sorts of great deals with it. We at first, right before this, Thanos is beating the crap out of Thor, and all of a sudden Mjolnir, you see it lifting, and then it just flies through and hits Thanos. Goes back, Steve catches it. Thor gives a "I knew it." Cap is worthy. This is a point where I almost lost my cool in the theater because some idiot in the front kept repeating, "Steve isn't strong enough. Mjolnir is not about physical strength. Rocket could pick it up if he's worthy, because of the enchantment from Odin in the first Thor. Whosoever holds this hammer, be they worthy, he will possess the power of Thor." Officially, a few times I've looked it up, the weight of Mjolnir is listed as somewhere between -1 and infinite pounds, because it's all about if you're worthy. We even had that line in Age of Ultron with Vision swinging it, knocking Ultron out. It's terribly well balanced. All of that. So he picks it up, and him and Thor are going after Thanos, and so on and so forth. Now, at this point, this is where the game of keep away starts, because Thanos notices Peter. We've already had Valkyrie shows up and grabs him while she's riding her Pegasus. We have Captain Marvel shows up to help. Cap yells, "Hey, Queens!" throws Mjolnir. Peter grabs it and gets yanked away, because, of course, he just has to go where Mjolnir's going. Ultimately, he drops the gauntlet. Thanos picks it up, and Tony jumps toward him. They fight, and Tony gets knocked away, because right before we see Thanos, after this moment, we see Strange, and he is literally just doing this. 14,605 futures. How many did we win? 1. Tony knows what he has to do. In the struggle over the gauntlet that Thanos ultimately won, it's Stark in a Stark Tech suit fighting Thanos for a Stark Tech gauntlet. Even if just it's subconscious, Tony was thinking, I gotta have those stones. His suit pilfered all the stones. Thanos puts the gauntlet on, snaps, nothing happens. He turns it over and looks, no stones. Tony turns around his hand, and here are the stones. And the Stark Tech that he's wearing, he's putting them in place. Ultimately, we see Tony snap. Thanos, all of his forces, gone. They get snapped away. Tony, unfortunately, is just human, and that kills him. RDJ's character, RDJ is at the end of his contract, and Tony Stark is now dead. We get a scene at the funeral where he's basically giving his will through a hologram, similar to what we saw him doing at the beginning on the Benatar, recording the message for Pepper. And then at the very end, oh, there was a great moment in the keep away. I forgot. Not integral, but great. Uh, Captain Marvel shows up. She's smacking him around. Thanos literally rips the Power Stone out of the gauntlet, punches her with the fist that's holding it, knocking her basically out of orbit, puts the stone back in. Basically showing it's going to take the stones to beat him. But we're back. We're post funeral, where you saw everybody, including the kid from Iron Man to Iron Man 3. Same actor too. I forget the kid's name, but he was there. Captain Marvel was there. Thor was there. Professor Hulk in a suit, which looked weird. Even Fury was there. Then Morgan tells Happy she wants a cheeseburger, and a callback to the Captain or the Iron Man 1. I want a good old American cheeseburger. Then we get the final bit. Cap is going to go through time, replacing the stones in the exact moment that they took them out of their past. They've already said nothing they do can affect their own future, because once you travel into the past, that past becomes your future. You can do nothing that would prevent your own trip into the past. So while, yes, he is taking the stones back to the moment they took them, it's technically a split second after they took them. And they say, how long will this take? And Banner says, for him, as long as he needs. For us, about 5 seconds. He jumps back in time, going to 1970 to Camp Lehigh for the Tesseract, going to battle in New York for the Scepter, Thor Dark World for the Aether, Guardians for the Power Stone, battle in New York for the Time Stone. I'm missing one. Vormir. Ironically, he has to go give the stone back to Red Skull. And at one point, Banner even said he tried to bring Tasha and Gamora, or Tasha and Vision back. You can't undo that because it wasn't because of the snap. And Cap goes back. And then they try to bring him back, and nothing happens. And now this is basically the aftermath. And I didn't bring this up because these are questions that basically are here because of the time travel mechanics of this movie. Gamora from 2014 Guardians comes with Thanos, but she ultimately fights against him, and she's left in 2019. Nebula shoots 2014 Nebula in the heart, killing her, and doesn't vanish. Thanos dies before he collected the stones, so he couldn't have snapped. Ultimately, what we're coming to is that all of this happened in an alternate timeline, an alternate universe. They did not undo their snap. They didn't undo their snap. They created an alternate universe where the snap happened and they were snapped away. And when they entered it, at the moment they were snapped away, everyone else was as well. And they brought their people back to an alternate universe. Because the Guardians would have never happened without Gamora. Nebula should be dead. None of the snaps should have happened. And they wouldn't have had to go back in time. So it has to be not time travel, but dimensional travel. To where literally we're going to say, because we've had episodes in Sliders where one dimension's time will move faster or slower than another's. Or it will move backwards to where you literally could sidestep. You're not going back in time. You're stepping sideways into another universe, another dimension, where in that dimension it's 1970. Or in that dimension it's 2014. That's the only way I can come up with it, is that it's not time travel, it's dimensional travel. And we have had in print, because in print the canonical Earth that we're all reading about is Earth 616. They wouldn't use Earth 616 if there weren't at least 615 more. So that's what I think has to happen. Or it has to be. But at the very end, when Cap doesn't come back, Sam looks over, gets Bucky's attention, and they walk over to a bench by the lake with a 100-plus-year-old Steve Rogers. sitting on a bench looking out. They find out when he got back, he decided, I'm going back to have my dance, and I'm not leaving. And he lived out his life with Peggy. Now, that does beg the question, why wasn't he there when she was in the hospital? Well, fairly easy to answer. Peggy got Alzheimer's in addition to whatever killed her. So it wouldn't have been her waking up and going, why are you young? For an Alzheimer's patient, a lifetime can feel like a dream and you can forget it. But she remembered Steve from 1940s, and he's back. So, and he didn't know at that point what was going on. At one point, he gives the shield to Sam. And we get a look between Sam and Bucky that Bucky gives a nod. That's a nod to the comic books because Bucky technically should have been the next Cap. But Sam is the new Captain America. They shake hands. Steve puts his left hand over the clasped hands, and we see a wedding ring. Sam says, you want to tell me about that? And Steve says, no, I don't think I do. Ever the gentleman to the end. And that's Steve Rogers. And we end on that. And for those of you who are still with me after 51 minutes and 2 movies, which I think is a pretty good time, because I sped through a lot of stuff. There is no end credit scene. Okay, there's no scene. This is the same logic they're using as Logan. This was the end of Wolverine's arc in Logan. So they didn't do a post-credit or even a mid-credit scene. They let it end for the character. The same is true here. Tony is dead. Cap is gone. This is the end of an arc. Phase 3 is really the end of a decade. So if you do watch all the way to the end, there is a sound of a hammer striking metal on an anvil. It's a callback to the very beginning of this entire journey. Tony building the Mark I in the cave with Jensen. And I love the full circle bit of it. Now, this has been a long video. It's the longest video I've made, I think. And I warned you, if you didn't believe me and you watched and you haven't seen the movie, I've spoiled the crap out of it. I warned you, and I'm going to put warnings all over this thing on YouTube so that you know, if you haven't seen the movies, don't watch this video. I hope people take that seriously. It's why I don't do live on much at all. But I enjoyed this. There is the question of how they're going to go forward. Will it be Amadeus Cho? Will it be Riri Williams building her own Iron Man or Iron Girl suit? Will we get any of the new stuff? There was no tie-in to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which we know is getting at least 2 more seasons that haven't launched. Normally, there was a tie-in at some point to the deal. In Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier. We actually got to go to S.H.I.E.L.D. And we had the Triskelion, which had already been talked about in S.H.I.E.L.D., the show. And they bookended that. Ultron even bookended it with going after List. We get the Age of Ultron movie. Then after it, we get the rest and the Sokovia Accords. Thor Dark World even got a mention, for crying out loud, but they didn't do it here. So I really hope in the opening episode of this next season they do react to it. It could have been that the snap took out everybody but Coulson and May, and Coulson, of course, if you're watching it, you know Coulson's fate. It could have been that the agents weren't there, and now they'll be back, and they just snapped back to somewhere that nobody was with them to bring them to the battle the Battle of Endgame. But from everything I've seen, I don't think we're going to get Amadeus Cho and Riri. We're going to get whole cloth creations. Okay? They've said they want to distance themselves from print. We all Far From Home or Homecoming, some print stuff, but not a lot. Captain Marvel, they had really no choice. They had to tell her origin story because she's never been in the MCU, and they have a lot of people that watch but don't read. Ant-Man and the Wasp, this is something they've kind of done before. They actually introduced Scott Lang to print because of the movie, the plans they had for that. So they retconned Ant-Man in print because they'd already written the movie to use Scott Lang, not Hank Pym, and so on and so forth. So I honestly think we're going to get Pepper and Hulk, Clint, Nebula will be there, Thor, fat or not, will be there, Captain Marvel will be there, Rhodey, Sam, Rocket, all of those, the people that survived Endgame, they're going to still be around. But here's the one thing, and this has been brought up by a couple of my friends. It's very possible that Cap, Tony, Tasha, Vision, any of those people who died in a way they couldn't be brought back could actually make a return through the dimensional travel, the time travel. Because all they have to do is go back to the Battle of Wakanda and pull Vision out. Or better yet, go back to Scotland. Tell Wanda that and tell them both, if you don't leave and Wanda has to stay, you're both going to die. Wanda's going to die anyway because you can't undo the snap. It's already happened. It's in your past. It's there. But Vision could make a return. Tony could make a return by going back to, I don't know, post-Winter Soldier. Or post-Ultron, even. Or even better, go back to right after Civil War. And tell him that what's happening and what's going on, and he needs to come with them. And of course, at some point, you'll send them back to their own time. But it is possible. And I could see RDJ making cameos. There's even a possibility for him to become an AI in the form of a hologram. It's been done. So, moving forward, we're finally at a point where I really don't have predictions. I've had predictions that I've been about 75% right since Iron Man because I've read these comics. The only two movies that I have gotten better than 95% right were Iron Man 1 and Cap First Avenger. I got Avengers about 80%. But origin stories are really all I know backward and forward. But still, it was good. It was very, very good. I'm planning on seeing it a couple more times because there were Easter eggs I missed. The little callbacks, Morgan wanting a cheeseburger, Sam and Bucky saying on your left, all of those little things were really good, and it did not feel like a 3-hour movie. The drama, humor, and action were spaced out perfectly. To where I didn't get a refill on my drink because I wasn't drinking much of it because I'm just sitting there watching the movie, and then I realized I actually have a tiny bit left when I'm leaving. It was honestly, I was shocked. I'd heard it didn't feel 3 hours. Didn't believe him. It didn't. So I'm gonna cut off here. We're approaching an hour, and I need to go do other things. But let me know. I will say this: preface your comments if they have spoilers. Preface your comments with the words spoilers, and then give 6 or 7 or 10 carriage returns to force the show more. I do not want to spoil this movie. I don't want to spoil any movie for anyone. Okay? That's why anytime I will comment on a spoiler video, I'll still say spoilers and give a good number of carriage returns to force the show more so that my comment involves spoilers. Please do the same. You wouldn't want someone spoiling a movie you've been waiting on. Don't do it for them. Okay? We're not the idiots who jumped onto 4chan at 4 in the morning to find out from people in Britain what happened in the Harry Potter books, and then drive by Barnes and Nobles an hour or while people are lined up and yelling out spoilers. And I don't want that to ever happen. So I'm going to tag the crap out of this to let you know there's spoilers. Please be kind in the comments and don't do spoilers. And until next time, everybody have just a great day. Also, as always, please remember to like and share this video as well as to subscribe and to turn on notifications because stuff like this is not on my schedule. This I'm going to post tonight, which I've got my scheduled videos coming out on normally, But once this is ready and I have the proper spoilery text around, I'm going to post it. So it's off schedule. So you want to be subscribed to notifications so you get notified of stuff like this. But you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.